Washington mornings on the Mall. 105.9 FM. And AM 630. WMAL.
8:37 on WMAL. Brian Neiman, Brian Wilson with you. Pleased to be joined now by Maryland Congressman, Democrat Chris Van Hollen, representing District Number 8 in Maryland. Congressman Van Hollen, good to have you on the program.
Good to be with you guys this morning.
We talked a lot this morning about the report that came out from the CBO yesterday, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, that warned about this fiscal cliff that we're going to go over on January 1st if nothing is done with taxes and with sequestration. And they said in their report that it would basically mean we're going to go into recession. It would disrupt recent progress that we've made. Unemployment would go up to 9.1%. Perhaps as many as 2 million jobs would be lost, and that they would consider it a recession. I'm curious to get your take on what the CBO said yesterday, and whether or not you think there is anything that will be done or can be done with Congress to stop that from actually happening.
Well, I totally agree with CBO. It's a very serious situation, and that we should act now rather than later to try to avoid the fiscal cliff. There are two things that could be done immediately. One is to immediately extend all the tax relief for 98% of the American people. We need to, at the same time, be addressing our deficits, as they also pointed out in that CBO report. And if we immediately extend tax relief for 98% of the American people, that will provide certainty and avoid the fiscal cliff. And with respect to the sequester, what we need to do is substitute an alternative amount of deficit reduction, not through these MEDAX cuts, but through targeted cuts, but also closing a lot of special interest tax loopholes. And we should do that now. We need to take a balanced approach. There needs to be a compromise on this issue. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of hope that we're going to see much compromise coming out of the House right now, but I'm going to continue to urge my colleagues to move now, not later. All
right, let me ask you about that. But by the 98%, you're saying, cut taxes for those who make less than $200,000 a year or $250,000 a year. The Ernst & Young accounting firm put out a report not too long ago that said if you do that and you let the taxes increase, the Bush tax cuts on those who make over $200,000 a year, you would hurt the economy. It would be 710,000 fewer jobs in the economy. Real after-tax wages would drop by about 2%, 1.8%, and it would hurt the overall GDP tremendously. So if that's accurate, and most people say, hey, Ernst & Young's got a pretty good reputation on that, then why raise taxes right now?
Well, there are a couple issues. First of all, just to clarify, everybody would get tax relief under this proposal, because if you're making over $250,000, you still get the benefit of tax relief on your first $250,000, which actually is more tax relief than people making under $250,000 will get. That's number one.
Okay.
Number two, I did see the Ernst & Young report, and they made some faulty assumptions that are not included in the president's plan. They assume that we're not going to be reducing the deficit over a period of time, and that the growing deficits will also have a break on the economy as we recover. When in fact, if you look at the trajectory of the president's plan, we will do that. That was a big, faulty assumption, and they've not been able to explain that. So listen, obviously we've got to get the economy in full gear. We've made progress, but we got a long way to go. One thing we could do immediately is to pass the president's jobs proposal that calls for more investment in our national infrastructure, in our roads and bridges, in our transit ways, our energy infrastructure. Not only does that need to be done because we need to repair and expand it, but you also have 14% unemployment in the construction industry. There are a number of other measures he's proposed. Unfortunately, we haven't even had a vote on those things. Okay. But then in the long term, we got to deal with the deficit, and if we don't ask higher income people to pay something, it means the budget gets taken out on everybody else and everything else a lot harder.
Congressman, I hear what you're saying, but let's just be clear about a couple of things. The CBO report came out. Nonpartisan CBO report says, look, if nothing is done, this is bad stuff. We're talking about the unemployment rate going to 9.1%. We're talking about a 2.9% contraction in the GDP, losing 2 million jobs, and that we'll go back into another recession. I mean, the situation looks to be pretty bleak. And yet when I hear your proposal, I don't hear a willingness to compromise. You're laying out the Democratic position, which has been the Democratic position for some time, and I'll grant you the Republicans aren't budging either. Doesn't somebody have to blink? Doesn't somebody have to say, okay, we got to find a compromise and move this thing off dead center, or we're headed for a world of hurt?
Well, we do need to compromise, and the model for that is the bipartisan Simpson-Bowles Commission, the Fiscal Commission. And they were very clear. They said that if we got...
But your president largely ignored that.
Well, actually, if Bowles, Erskine Bowles, the co-chair, just wrote a op-ed piece in the Washington Post 3 weeks ago that said that the president's plan was much closer to the principles of Simpson-Bowles than anything they're seeing from Mitt Romney or Paul Ryan.
Erskine Bowles also said very nice things about Paul Ryan and his plan.
No, he said nice things about Paul Ryan. He did not say many good things about his plan, especially...
I would say go back and look at that soundbite, because I think he did.
Yes, and I would ask you to play the entire soundbite. It was only a piece of it that was played, and he called the Ryan healthcare plan radical. So go take a look at the whole thing, because there was some selective editing there. Yes, he did say good things about Paul Ryan as a person. So would I. I get along very well personally.
Well, and
with
on
Paul.
That point, let's move to the other reason we wanted to have you on. We hear that in the mock debates that will take place with Joe Biden before the vice presidential debate, the sort of the warm-up debates that you do, that you will be portraying Paul Ryan. Have you been doing a lot of studying to prepare for this? How does that work?
Well, listen, I sit next to Paul every day that the Budget Committee is meeting. We sit side by side, and we resolved very early on, when he became the chairman and I became the senior Democrat, that we would express our very deep differences on policy issues in a civil manner. And I think anybody who tunes into the Budget Committee or to our discussions on the floor of the House on budget issues would see that. We understand the differences, but we also believe that we should have a debate that sort of elevates the choices, rather than engage in name calling. And we've been able to stick with that. So I'm pleased to be asked to help the vice president. He knows these issues well, but I have seen how Paul Ryan presents them, and so
you're familiar with
forward
that,
right?
to that. Are you concerned at all about the vice president's performance, given the fact that, well, of late, he's sort of stuck his foot in on a couple occasions?
The vice president clarified his remarks the other day, and at the same time he stuck with his fundamental point, which is that he believes, and I agree with him, that in the aftermath of the financial meltdown on Wall Street, it's appropriate that we put in place regulations to protect consumers, to prevent that from happening again. Mitt Romney and Paul Ryan are saying we have to sort of, as they say, de-shackle Wall Street, sort of let anything go. And what the vice president was saying is that that's a surefire way of getting ourselves in the same mess once again.
All right. Well, Congressman Chris Van Hollen, always a pleasure to have you on the program.
It's good to be with you. Thanks.
It is 8:45 on 105.9 FM AM 630 WMAL.